All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first workshop of Ministry Fair 2022, Truth and Love, the Work of Ministry. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Ms. Ada Ramirez for providing Spanish translation for today's session. There is no default language, so please be sure to click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen and select either English or Spanish. As a reminder, the session is being recorded and will be posted to the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel and will be available for viewing on demand. A link to the video along with the resources presented will also be available on the EDLA Convention website at www.diocesanconvention.com. Kicking off our series in 2022 will actually be me. Today is how to host a ministry fair workshop on Zoom. This presentation is designed for anyone who has an idea for a workshop but isn't sure where to start. At this time, I ask everyone to please mute yourselves. I welcome all questions and comments, so please put them in the chat as they come to you, and I will answer them in the order asked. So we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started with presentation today. So here we are, Truth and Love, the Work of Ministry, how to present a ministry fair workshop on Zoom. Today, the idea is that if anyone's got an idea for a workshop, but they're not quite sure where to start, that's what this is all about today. So a little bit of background on ministry fair. It's a long-standing tradition in the diocese. It used to be an extremely well-attended event for just annually. It was hugely popular while Bishop Bruno was in office. Every year, it was almost like a big festival, and there were educational workshops. And unfortunately, I never had the chance to attend the ministry fair back in the day. But back in December of 2019, Bishop Diane Bruce actually asked me to relaunch Ministry Fair because it had been a while since we had the chance to host one. So I worked with Canon Melissa McCarthy, our Canon to the Ordinary, and the Reverend Laurel Coote, and we hosted Equipping the Saints to Serve at Campbell Hall, the Episcopal K-12 school up in Studio City. And that was a really great day. We had about 16 different educational workshops throughout the day. They were in English, they were in Spanish, they ranged from lectures to hands-on training like collaging and to just all sorts of roundtable discussions. It was really a successful event. But of course, that ministry fair was hosted in March of 2020, and we all know what happened after that. So our first virtual convention in November of 2020 led us to our first virtual ministry fair in 2021. And we had Servants of the Spirit Gifts for Ministry last year. And we did twice monthly workshops on Zoom, and it actually proved to be hugely popular. It was a good opportunity for people to join at their convenience. We were able to record the sessions. We were able to have the simultaneous translation. And so this format actually has been working really well. So as we continue through these pandemic times, we're going to continue doing our ministry fair online with these twice monthly workshops. So that's the plan for this year. Hopefully in 2023, we'll be able to gather in person again. But until then, we are going to continue on Zoom. Now, again, the idea with today's workshop is that if you have an idea and you're not sure where to start, that's why I'm doing this morning, because we're looking for new voices to join us. And, everybody has a different level of experience and familiarity with technology. Maybe you haven't given a talk like this to a group before. Maybe you've never presented on Zoom. Maybe you've never used PowerPoint before. Everybody's got a different level of familiarity with technology, and that's perfectly fine. I've been on Zoom, constantly for the last couple of years, so all this is old hat to me, but that's not necessarily true for everyone. So this is just meant to be, kind of a beginner's how-to on how to do this kind of thing. So the first thing when you are putting together your workshop is you want to develop your content first. There are so many different topics to choose from, really. We have the schedule. How we've worked the schedule is that the first Wednesday evening of every month, we're dedicating to a ministry topic. And the second Saturday morning of every month, we're dedicating to administrative topic. Administrative things might be things like training for parish treasurers, church insurance, managing endowments, finding alternate streams of revenue, how to build a website, kind of things like that. Ministry topics are more focused on food programs, maybe laundry love, Sunday school, youth groups, or starting a Seeds of Hope garden. And, we don't need to limit it there. Maybe you have an idea for something a little bit more spiritual topic, something about pastoral care in these pandemic times, or maybe techniques for meditation, or how to build a labyrinth. Looking at you, All Saints Riverside recently built a labyrinth on their campus. So there's a wide variety of topics. And as you select your topic, we have two basic kinds of workshop style. We've got teaching a class or sharing an experience. There are other, roundtable discussion or panel discussion. Those tend to work better for free-flowing conversation, better in person. So I find on Zoom, the best way to do it is either teaching a class or sharing an experience. Teaching a class would be, maybe you're an experienced professional in a field. You want to do a best practices or a how-to. Maybe you work in insurance, or maybe you're an accountant or something like that. And so you can teach a master class on something. But the idea also is that you don't have to be an authority on a subject to give a workshop. And that's what I mean by sharing an experience. Maybe you want to present a case study on something. Maybe there's something that your congregation is doing that you'd like to share with others, the lessons that you've learned, and, share that information with others so that they can apply it in their own context. And that's the final point here, is that you want to be goal-oriented. You really want to, when you're developing your workshop topic, you want to be thinking about what do you want your attendees to walk away with? What information, what what lessons can they apply to their own context? So getting into a little bit more of the details, more about teaching a class. When you format your workshop for teaching a class, you've developed your content, what your topic is going to be, and now we're getting into formatting the presentation itself. You really want to start with the broad strokes before diving into the details. And what do I mean by this? You want to give a brief background on yourself, introduce the topic in general, and then you want to get into the details. Because the problem is that if you start with the details, your attendees might be a little bit confused. They might not be sure how the information is applicable to their own context without a clear idea of where the presentation is going. So you want to start with the big picture and then focus in and organize your material by topic. The other thing about teaching a class is that people have a tendency to learn best through story. Being storytellers, it's just part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. And when you're teaching a class, even topics that you might think are a little bit dry can instantly become engaging when you make that personal connection, when your attendee can imagine being in that situation. So I wanted to give an example for that. Last year, we had Jack Rutledge from Church Insurance Company, and he gave a talk on cyber risk and liability insurance. And, insurance might not be something that you think is really attention grabbing. But he connected the data that he was presenting with stories about how theft and fraud can happen in real life. And that's when, as an attendee, you start thinking about, oh yeah, I use PayPal to accept donations online. I use that service, or I use that procedure, or I use that software. And this is information that I need to know. So again, connect through story, connect through anecdotes, connect through example when you're teaching a class. Now, another kind of workshop that you can do is a case study. Like I mentioned, you don't necessarily have to be an authority on a subject in order to provide a workshop. Maybe there's something that your congregation is doing that you would like to share. Maybe you've got a Sunday school program that's just wildly successful, and you want to let other people know what it is that you're doing with your Sunday school program that is so successful. And the general format for doing a case study like this is going to be much the same as teaching a class. Again, you want to start with kind of the overview, the general, before you do a deep dive into the details. So again, I would recommend that you give a brief history or background on yourself and the topic, and then you move into introducing the ministry or the program or the curriculum. We had another talk last year with Margaret Nolde, who is the president of Girls Friendly Society here in the diocese. And they had just released a new curriculum, for change makers, for girls in leadership positions. And so that was the kind of thing that she talked about, was that curriculum, introducing the curriculum. And once you start introducing, what the program is, that's when you want to move into lessons learned. You want to talk about what worked for your program, what didn't work for your program. If you're talking about, a food program or a garden or something that's going on at your congregation, what are things that you have learned that make your program very successful? And what are some pitfalls that you've learned to avoid? And then, at the end, you really want to be goal oriented. Again, I keep coming back to this, but you want to be goal oriented. What do you want attendees to take away from this? How can they use this information in their own context? How do they start a program like that in their congregation, for example? What do they need in order to be able to start? So that's, a lot about developing your topic. That's, you want to get an idea for it. You want to format your class. You want to organize your materials so that you're starting with the general and working your way into the details. Now, another thing that I wanted to discuss this morning is a lot of people haven't really created PowerPoint presentations. They might be familiar with the Microsoft Office suite in general, but they haven't really had the opportunity to make a PowerPoint presentation and give it. So I wanted to give some, tips and tricks for doing this in this specific context. PowerPoint is an incredibly powerful tool. You can do a lot with it in terms of graphics and charts and multimedia. But in terms of this specific context, in terms of presenting a PowerPoint for a workshop for this ministry fair, you really don't need to get complicated with it. I like to keep it simple. So one of the things that I'm a big fan of is known as the 10-20-30 rule. And this is a style that was developed by a man named Guy Kawasaki. He is a marketing specialist in Silicon Valley. And he developed this format for presentations. It was originally designed for folks who were making business pitches to potential investors. But really, it works for any kind of hour-long presentation. So 10-20-30, 10 slides, 20 minutes of talking, and 30-point font. So what does this do? This keeps the presentation concise. You have a good set, you know how many slides you want. That helps keep you in the parameters of the amount of content that you want to develop. The 20 minutes of talking. I know that seems short. We're looking for an hour-long workshop, but the 20 minutes of talking is actually a really good frame of reference. It allows for introductions. It allows for, the final thanks and the outro. It gives wiggle room for any kind of technical difficulties, and it also allows us time for a Q&A. As far as the 30-point font, that keeps it easy to read. Text is a really great medium, but specifically for when you're writing articles or blog posts or things like that, when you're doing this kind of workshop, the idea is that you want it to be a little bit more conversational. You want it to be a little bit more engaging. You're talking, you've got people asking questions. It's a back and forth. And so text is not really a great medium for this. You want to keep it simple. So 30-point font also makes it easy to read. And I don't know if you'll notice, but this is the format that I'm doing for this presentation. I've got about 10 slides. I'm planning to talk for about 20 minutes, and all of my font is at least 30-point in size. So the other thing when you're creating a PowerPoint is that you don't want to be afraid of blank space. When you're looking at that slide and you see all that white, it might, people feel the need to fill up that space, but you really don't need to. Like I said, text is a great medium for when you're writing articles or posting, blogs on your website. But when you're in this kind of format, really, you want to limit the text to bullet points. And, you can do pictures, but it's not strictly necessary. And you want to avoid clip art. But if you've got pictures, maybe you've got your garden and you want to showcase how the garden looks and how you've set it up, absolutely put those pictures in. But pictures aren't necessarily something you have to include. It's okay to have blank space on your slides. So I wanted to share a little bit more about PowerPoint specifically. when I'm talking about keep it simple, as I said, PowerPoint is a very powerful tool, and it does a lot of the work for you, which if you're not familiar with it, I absolutely recommend it. As you can see on this slide, this is a screenshot of PowerPoint. You can use templates. It provides you with color palettes. You can simply select a color palette and it'll design the slides for you. And you can go with a pre-made format, add your bullet points, and you've got the slide. It really doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And I highly recommend it for this kind of format, that you really do keep it simple. Pick a nice color, keep your slides clean, use pictures where they feel appropriate, and just take advantage of the templates. You don't need to go too complicated with these kinds of things. So getting into the nuts and bolts. So again, this workshop is specifically talking about this context of providing a presentation. So when we're doing these ministry fair workshops, I always ask our presenters to log in a little bit early, about 15 minutes early. That gives us a chance to, get our ducks in a row. You can have a chance to practice sharing your screen. That's something that I ask people to do, even if they are very experienced with PowerPoint and Zoom. It's always a good idea to have a little time to practice to make sure that you've got everything set up. I generally work as the host. I will provide a welcome. I'll provide an introduction. I'll manage the tech side of things. And as you noticed from this morning, part of my introduction and instructions is information on interpretation, about choosing your own language. And I'll talk more about the simultaneous translation in just a moment. One of the things that I find works for these kinds of workshops is that we ask the participants to mute themselves, and we do comments and questions in the chat, in the Zoom chat. And that really makes moderating the Q&A a lot easier. It really facilitates the flow of communication between presenter and audience. That way, the presenter, we can kind of choose a good breathing point during the presentation in order to take those questions. Or, it allows the audience, for example, if they have a question that comes to them, they can throw it in the chat. They don't need to wait and remember it and find a place later. It can just be there waiting for you to answer that question. So then we get into the presentation, we get into the Q&A, and sometimes we'll do questions and answers as we go, depending if someone's got a question on a topic that is being discussed at that moment. We'll take a little break and answer those questions as they're appropriate throughout the presentation. And then at the end is just the outro and thanks, reminders about the live stream, reminders about the recording, and thanking everyone for joining and information for next time. So that's the nuts and bolts. That's how we structure these specific workshops. So another thing I wanted to cover today is how to present on Zoom. Because like I mentioned, I'm on Zoom all the time. This has become very familiar for me, but it's not necessarily familiar for anyone else, especially maybe you've been in meetings on Zoom, but you haven't had to present anything on Zoom. So here you'll see a little screenshot. This is what the bottom of your screen on Zoom looks like. And there's a little green button down there called Share Screen. And so what you want to do is have your file, have your slides, have your PowerPoint presentation already open and ready on your computer. And you're going to hit Share Screen. And it's going to bring up a window where you can select the file that you want to share to the screen. And so you're going to click that button. It's going to open your file. Now, when you're in PowerPoint just regularly, it's got your tiles of slides on the left. It's got, all the menu bars and everything like that. So when you're doing the presentation itself, something I find that a lot of people forget to do is to put it in slideshow. So at the bottom here of this slide, you'll see this is another screenshot of PowerPoint. There's a button at the top called slideshow, and then you hit from beginning. And that's how you get the nice big presentation slides, so that you don't have all the menu bars, you don't have all the things on the side. Instead, when you're sharing your screen, it's just the slide itself. This is how PowerPoint is meant to be presented. And a lot of people forget that, so I wanted to include that in this presentation. So as I mentioned, when you hit Share Screen on Zoom, it will pull up a window like this, and you simply select the screen that you want to share. Now, one of the things also is if it's more than PowerPoint, maybe you're presenting a video, maybe you've got a video clip or some kind of video introduction. You want to make sure that you share computer sound. That's always important. I've forgotten that in the past. And optimize screen sharing for video clip. So those are the two options there down at the bottom when you hit share screen. So just another little trick to remember, because it happens, you know, you'll share a video and completely forget to click those and then no one can hear it. I've done it before. So just a little reminder. So one of the things here I wanted to show you, this is a screenshot from YouTube. I wanted to kind of give you a little taste of what it looks like for your audience. Now, as an audience member here in this workshop, you know what it looks like from your perspective. You know, you can see the screen. You might be able to see a little box with my face. The attendees have the option of going into the menu at the top and exiting full screen mode. So you know what it looks like as an attendee on Zoom. For anybody that hasn't taken a look at the YouTube or the Facebook live stream, this is what it looks like. So you can see that we have the full slide being presented on the screen. And then we have our speaker in a little box in the corner with the name. So that's what it looks like on the live stream. So I wanted to show you that. That's what it looks like to our live stream audience. And in general, we live stream to Facebook and YouTube all of our workshops. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties this morning, so I'm just recording today's workshop, but that's what it looks like for a live stream audience. And you can see here, Davey from TENS created a great PowerPoint presentation. He's got the clean bullet points, everything's in blue. He's not afraid of blank space. He's got his logo here. So that's another example of a really nice, clean PowerPoint presentation. This was another good one. So moving on to some tips and tricks for being an effective presenter. So this is more, you know, if you haven't done this kind of talk before, I just wanted to give a couple of, you know, beginner's tips for doing this kind of presentation. So first of all, you know, if you're on a laptop and you have the ability to move, you want to set up somewhere that is quiet with decent lighting and a neutral background. This corner of my dining room is what I do for all of my presentations and all the times that I'm on Zoom. I've got some nice natural light. I've just got the wall behind me and some curtains, you know, so it's a nice neutral background. Zoom does offer the option, you're able to create like a fabricated background. You know, you have the beach behind you or something like that, or even blur your background. Double check that before you try it. My laptop, I don't know why my webcam is not a big fan of that function, but I'm never able to do that. So that's why I like to set up in this corner. Yeah, my laptop just does not like the Zoom background. So always double check that kind of stuff, but that is also an option. Next thing is sound quality. You don't need an expensive headset. I have a headset just because I'm on Zoom all the time. This one was actually pretty inexpensive. You don't need any kind of expensive setup. If you have, for example, earbuds that plug into a headphone jack, you can also use that, the kind that used to come with the older Apple iPhones. You know, and even your computer's built-in microphone might be fine, but then you just really want to make sure that you don't have any kind of echo, that you've got a quiet space, and just double check it in advance to make sure that it sounds okay. But again, we don't need to do anything too complicated. We don't need to do anything too expensive. As long as your audience can hear you and there's no kind of feedback or things like that, you're pretty much okay. Now, one of the biggest things about being an effective presenter, as I was talking about, don't inundate your slides with text. Don't just read from your slides. The slides should be a reference point. They should be a jumping point. They should be a place where you start and then expand. Because like I said, this kind of workshop, this kind of format, it's meant to be a little bit more engaging, a little bit more conversational. If I were just to read off the slides, there's no point in me talking. I could just send you the slides and you could read them. This is meant to be more conversational. Now, if you're not good, just speaking off the top of your head, I think some people are fabulous extemporaneous speakers. I'm not one of them. I have notes in front of me for this presentation. I recommend if you're not comfortable just talking off the top of your head like me, have some notes available, have some notes. A script, not necessarily. You don't necessarily want to just spend the whole time reading off of a page. It sounds a lot different, but instead have some notes so that you can make sure that there are things that you wanted to mention that you don't forget. Because I'm absolutely guilty of that. If I don't have it written down in front of me, my notes, I'll completely forget to mention something that I wanted to talk about. But the important thing is don't just read from your slides, because that's not what your audience is here for. Now, another thing that is really great about our ministry fair and about doing it on Zoom is that we do have the capability of doing simultaneous Spanish translation. And there's actually some really important things about working with a simultaneous translator. And one of those, like the top thing that I always hear from our translators, is to slow down. Translating into another language, it takes some time. So you want to make sure first that your interpreter is prepared in advance. I like to get the slides and notes sent over to Ada in advance. Oh, I'm getting a thumbs up from Ada. We want to have things in advance, especially if you're giving a workshop that has very particular terminology. For example, if you're giving a workshop about managing endowments, you're going to be talking about things like the corpus and investments and disbursements. And it helps for a translator to be prepared with that kind of vocabulary. And you want to avoid using acronyms, for example, or if you do use acronyms, you want to make sure that you define them so that your interpreter can keep up with you, make sure that they know what you're talking about so they can accurately translate. And slow down. That's the biggest one. It takes time to translate into another language. You want to slow down. You want to pause before answering questions. Take a breath, an extra breath. Take that breath when there's a comma, when you're reading something. So one of the things, there are other great tips for working with simultaneous translators. They don't necessarily apply in this context. So I'm going to have a complete list and post that on the convention website. If you're ever giving a talk in another kind of context, maybe you have breakout rooms, things like that. There's a lot of other tips and tricks that make life easier for your translator. So those are going to be posted on the convention website along with the link to this video. So on that note, with the things that are going to be available on the convention website, that's another great thing to be an effective presenter, is offer resources for follow-up. Have materials that you presented available to be seen later. If there's reading, that would be helpful for your audience. If there's other, infographics or things like that. So I'll have some stuff for this. For example, Reverend Michelle Rackison, the CFO of the Diocese of California, gave a series of talks on treasurer training. And that always, when I posted those, I always included links to some recommended books, to the church manual of business affairs and accounting methods. So always have some resources for follow-up. Even also your email address, you want to keep that conversation going. If people have questions, they can reach out to you. You can keep that conversation going. And on that note, there's my contact info. So like I mentioned, I'm going to have these slides up on the website. I'm going to have the tips and tricks for working with a translator up on the website. And there's going to be a link to this video on the website. And so again, maybe you have a fantastic idea for a workshop, but you've never done this before. That's okay. I think that these steps are actually pretty simple. They're pretty easy to follow. This is a good step-by-step. It doesn't need to be complicated. And we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear that information that you have to share. But absolutely, if you ever want to talk about the scope of a workshop or anything like that, reach out to me, email me. I am always happy to help. And so I'm going to stop sharing now, and I am going to open up the floor to any questions. If you have questions or comments and you're watching this video later, feel free to email me, swylie@ladiocese.org. I am happy to answer any questions. But let's take a moment if anyone has any questions here today. Oh, I think we've got one. Just wait a moment for that to pop up. So again, as we go through the presentations, the workshops on Zoom, the chat function is really helpful. It allows for a good facilitated Q&A, so that we can kind of time it. So could you select English in the interpretation icon? Yes, exactly. So there is no default language when you do a Zoom webinar. So actually, we had one last year that was really fantastic. Reverend Roberto Martinez gave a talk on stewardship from a Latino perspective. He presented a case study. He talked about what was going on at La Iglesia de la Magdalena. And it was in Spanish. That was the default language, was in Spanish. That was, how he was presenting it. So our attendees still had to pick Spanish or English. And in that case, we had Ada doing English translation, and it was great. But there's no default language. You got to pick it. So that's a great question. Thank you. So do we have any other questions? Gonna wait just a moment, see if we got another question. No, I think that is it for today. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm happy to kick off this series. It was really exciting to do a workshop of my own after hosting so many last year. I'm excited for this year's ministry fair. I'm excited to have these workshops again. I'm really excited to offer this kind of information and feature voices that we haven't necessarily heard from before. So we would love to have you join. Again, as a reminder, this session was recorded. It'll be available on the website along with the resources presented. At diocesanconvention.com, we will have the schedule of all the upcoming workshops and the links to register. And until then, thank you all for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And I look forward to seeing you soon.